Reacting right now to the heated exchange between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
To help us break down all the impacts of this conversation, let's bring in WTOP National Security Correspondent JJ Green. Now, JJ, this is a case of high-stakes, emotional negotiations that normally happen behind doors, but the world was watching this live as it played out. How is this different than anything we've seen before?
Well, we've never seen anything like this. That's how different it is. We have never seen an exchange, at least in modern times, since there's been television and televised White House pool sprays. We've never seen anything like this. And if you look further into this situation, I don't know that we've ever seen anything like this that wasn't filmed, at least in terms of what happens in these situations in the White House. In part because usually there may be disagreements and disagreements and issues, but they're usually done in a diplomatic way. But there was nothing about this situation that was diplomatic. It was just a pure shouting match. And it was one that probably have consequences for not just the U.S., not just Ukraine, but for the entire world. Billions of people are most likely going to suffer because of what took place in the White House today.
Yeah, so let's talk about that and go a little deeper. Like you said, it is rare to see a leader of an allied country kicked out, essentially, of the White House. Where do you think things go from here? Do you think that these two sides can come back to the table after both sides cool off?
Well, that's possible, but anything is possible, just like what we saw here. I mean, never thought it was possible, but that's a perfect reason why you should believe that anything's possible, because it did. But here's the problem. You know, President Trump has a problem with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and you should just remember Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the reason he was impeached in his first term. And, you know, there are these situations where people have been asking him for days upon days if he would apologize to him for calling him a dictator. So the president clearly felt as though, you know, some people thought that he hadn't treated Volodymyr Zelenskyy appropriately. But the vice president, J.D. Vance, jumped into this situation and talked about him not being grateful enough and essentially talking about how this situation between Russia and Ukraine should be handled diplomatically, and didn't like Zelensky's response. So what you have here is a fundamental disagreement about how things should proceed, and you have a bunch of dislike as well, because I don't think J.D. Vance liked it very much that the president of Ukraine supported their competitor in the election, and he brought it up as well.
That was interesting to hear that he mentioned Biden. Actually, both J.D. Vance and President Trump mentioned Biden and the former administration, actually going back to the Obama administration, going back that far from 2014. But let's talk about how the world is reacting. Our John Rogers at the Alert Desk, he read off a number of countries that are showing support for Ukraine. What do you think this is going to do when it comes to if anybody is supporting the United States after this meeting?
Oh, well, that's a whole other thing. People are going to support the United States, and things are going to be a lot different. The relationships will be a lot different. What I was saying in the beginning of this discussion is the U.S., specifically not the U.S., but the president, and of course the vice president, have specific problems with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And the bottom line on it is they don't like him very much, and it was clear. This situation in terms of the rest of the world, well, the rest of the world is angry. At least a lot of the world, I should say. A lot of the U.S.'s allies are angry, and people who've been supporting Volodymyr Zelenskyy are angry. But they're going to have to take a minute, get some sleep if you're in the time zone where it's sleeping hours, or take a walk if you're in our time zone and further west. But people are going to have to understand the U.S. is a partner, and the president is a person that they're going to have to deal with. So how will they do that? They're going to do it diplomatically. What took place today was a rarity. It's something, in fact, it's unique. Like I said, I've never seen this happen before, but I can guarantee you that the rest of the world will be on guard for the possibility of this. But there's one other thing, too, that we need to think about as we look at this. There is a very dangerous period of time that's passing right now, because this was a disaster for the U.S. because Russia now knows exactly what the U.S. thinks, how it's approaching the situation, and Russia always uses these kind of vulnerabilities to their advantage. In fact, right after this situation took place, an attack in Ukraine started. And then the former president of Russia came out and called Zelensky an insolent pig who was getting what he deserved essentially from President Trump. So Russia and what Russia does based on this is a problem for the entire world when you look at how aggressive they are in general terms. So it's a huge problem.
The entire world, as well as the European countries, European Union. We know there is a high-stakes Ukraine summit that takes place on Sunday. What does that meeting look like now that it is very clear where the U.S. stands in its foreign policy on Ukraine?
You're going to see a lot of hugs, handshaking, backslapping, a lot of smiles, and a lot of messages of support for Ukraine. The problem right now is that it appears as though there is a movement, at least in the president's orbit, to get another leader for Ukraine. So people in Europe are going to have to make their decision about whether or not they're going to support this president, President Zelenskyy, or I guess reluctantly start moving towards someone else. But the truth of this matter, from my perspective, based on the people that I've spoken to today, there is an enormous amount of support for him, and it's only growing. And the French president tweeted something a while ago that said, let's choose Europe. I think what he's talking about, and I think what many of these other folks are saying, is that it's really rather clear right now that they've had their doubts about whether the U.S. and Europe and NATO would remain cohesive, even in spite of all of the things they've seen and heard. But after this display today, and after Russia's reaction, which frankly is celebrating in the streets in different places around Russia, I'm hearing tonight, they recognize in Europe that they are in danger. They recognize their partners are in danger, their citizens are in danger, and they recognize that Russia now probably feels emboldened, and they're going to have to make sure that they're safe, Ukraine's safe, and their future is safe, and they're going to probably do that this weekend.
JJ Green, WTOP, thank you so much. There's so much to dive into on this topic. I know we'll talk again. Thank you, my friend.